The NFL draft is now complete, so let's get into how every team did across the NFL, who improved, who fumbled the bag a little bit, and the various storylines that surround it. Let's get into it. Thank you guys for being here. This is episode 16, I believe, the Ballhawk Sports Podcast. We're going to get into the NFL draft today. I'm going to go division by division and just kind of look at the different teams' drafts, who did well, who didn't do well. But before I jump right into that, I want to address the biggest storyline from this weekend, and that is the what happened with Shedeur Sanders. Now, I am very much tired of seeing his name in the news. I was a little tired of it during the draft process because there were a lot of other quarterbacks that were worthy of that kind of attention. I luckily didn't get to watch Mel Kiper have a meltdown on ESPN, but it was a lot. I feel like a lot of experts or perceived experts in the media were fighting for life and their own credibility for some people, because it's a lot easier for an NFL team to say, we're going to take him off our board. There's no chance that we're going to take him. Just we don't like him. When you're in the media, you don't really have that option because you're not actually drafting the kids. You're just giving your opinion on them. And a lot of people would rather, someone fall and then they have the storyline like they did, why is this guy falling? What is it this? Was it that? Was it this? Was it that? Then someone get brought from below, because then, if someone put Sanders as their fourth best quarterback and then he got drafted as the second best quarterback, well, then you're going to look at him and be like, well, what happened there? It seemed obvious. Nobody wanted to be the outlier. With that being said, I had him as my 43rd prospect, I think, in my most recent big board. I never saw him as a first round talent. I had him mocked into the first round a couple times because quarterbacks get overdrafted. I think Cam Ward is the only quarterback this year that had a real first round grade. But you bank on potential with quarterbacks, especially in the NFL right now, where you need a great quarterback. And there have been a lot of success stories of guys developing when they get to the NFL into great quarterbacks. So there was some guys with potential, Jalen Milroe and Jackson Dart specifically, that teams could dream on, sitting like Jordan Love did, like Pat Mahomes did, Jalen Hurts to some degree, and developing with NFL level coaching and an NFL level system to be successful at the NFL level. But at the end of the day, I viewed Shedeur Sanders this entire time as like a Mac Jones type player. Everyone was comparing him to like a Jared Goff. I didn't think he was ever that talented. Jared Goff was very easily the number one overall pick in his draft. I believe it was 2016. I never saw him like that. So I compared him more favorably to Mac Jones, which when he was drafted, it was, he was the safe pick. Well, safe in that sense meant like finished product, and Mac Jones as a finished product did a good for a year, but when the league adjusted, he didn't have the talent to adjust back to the league, so he ended up failing as a franchise quarterback. And he'll be a good backup. He'll have a long career as a backup quarterback and a spot starter, and maybe he can have it like a Geno Smith type of situation happen in a few years. But that's what I viewed as Shedeur Sanders' best case scenario. The best case scenario is you draft him, you have a good year or two, and then the league adjusts to him. He doesn't have the talent to adjust back, and he becomes just an average at best quarterback. With that being said, do I think he should have fallen to the fifth round? No. Do I understand why it happened? Yes. You can't just roll into the draft process and think that you're king shit, because you're not. The NFL will always take, especially at the quarterback level, they will always take the personal and the personality of players into consideration. You can look at this draft just this year, and there were plenty of players that had personality issues that got dropped in the draft. Mike Green is one of them. who was pretty widely respected to be a first round pick, even top 20, ended up falling to the end of the second round to the Ravens. Now, there's some sexual abuse allegations there that scare some teams off, as he was accused in high school and he was accused in college, that made him transfer to Marshall for his last year. But for a quarterback, you don't even want to sniff anything like that. The last thing you want is a hothead at quarterback that causes problems. And the various stories that I've been able to read leading into this and throughout the draft, after the draft and leading up to this episode, was, Todd McShay in his podcast said something along the lines of, Shedeur Sanders was given a pre-install to review and go into his meeting with the Giants and Brian Daboll, their head coach, and go over that. And he basically said, "I don't need to look this over. I'm perfectly fine." So he went into the meeting, and Daboll got upset, rightfully so, that he hadn't looked over the install package. So he questioned Shedeur on it, and Shedeur was basically like, "I don't need to do this, man. I'm better than this. Like, I'm above this." And you're not. I mean, there's some there's some caution to be had, because Johnny Manziel did the opposite of what Shedeur Sanders just did. Johnny Manziel and his agent set forth a perfect plan that worked very well and ended up with him getting drafted in the first round, despite the fact that people were talking about before the draft something like what happened to Shedeur Sanders happening to Johnny Manziel. But Johnny Manziel did the opposite. He understood the importance that the interviews and the pre-draft process would have on teams' perception of him, because you can hear from other people all you want. When you get in front of me and I'm looking into your eyes and you tell me, you answer my questions, you give me whatever you have, I'm going to believe that over, even like a best friend saying like, "Oh, this guy's a good dude. He's there for his teammates. He's this, he's that." It's not going to matter. If you come in and you make a good first impression on me when I meet you for the first time, whether it's at, the scouting combine, whether it's at Senior Bowl, whether it's at a private workout or a top 30 visit, it doesn't matter. And there were a lot of NFL teams that thought that Sanders should have performed in the Senior Bowl. There's also teams that thought that Cam Ward should have performed in the Senior Bowl. Now, at the end of the day, I don't think him not performing at the Senior Bowl was the reason that he fell. I think I do agree with the reports that say that some owners took him off the board. Some owners stepped in and said, "This guy's an asshole. I don't want him representing my franchise." I completely can understand how some people would do that. Now, clearly, I think the opposite happened with the Browns. I think the Browns drafted Gabriel to avoid the Sanders situation, and their owner probably stepped in and said, "No, get Sanders. Like, the value is insane," or whatever he wanted to reason for making them trade up to get Sanders when they had already drafted a quarterback. I think was more of an ownership decision than a front office coaching decision. Now, if he had fallen past the Browns and the Browns didn't take him, where does he go? I don't know. There's a chance that he goes undrafted and then he gets to pick his team of whoever wants to take him. I put out a video basically after day 2 and he wasn't picked, going to day 3, of saying like, I could see Will Howard going over him. The potential of Will Howard is great, and I personally see Shedeur Sanders as a largely finished product. I don't think there's much room for growth or progression in his game. I think that he had the most extracted out of him at the college level, with his dad as the head coach and Pat Shermer as the coordinator. There were glaring issues in his game where if you look at his underlying stats, because his base stats are good. He had over 4,000 passing yards. He had almost 40 touchdowns. But if you look at the negatives, because the NFL doesn't care about that, the NFL would expect that a player of his caliber would have good numbers. Cam Ward had good numbers. Jackson Dart had good numbers. The only quarterback going into this year that really didn't have good numbers overall, because Milroe had great running numbers with lackluster passing numbers, was Tyler Show, who the whole process, I don't really understand why he ended up going where he did to the Saints, but that's for a decision. That's a decision the Saints had to make, and hopefully it worked out for the Saints, but that's for them to live with. Not me, because I didn't draft him. But the quarterback position is somewhere you have to always grow. You also have to take your lumps. You have to be the guy saying it's my fault. And throughout his college career, and I'm sure in interviews as well as the Todd McShay podcast um, comments said, and various other articles and podcast comments have said, Shador never did that. Just speaking, going back to the Daboll conversation that he had with Shador, reportedly, he said like he basically put it on a platter for Shador to say, I messed up, I made a mistake, it's on me, I take responsibility, and he just didn't. He blamed other people, and he wouldn't accept responsibility. And for a quarterback, especially in a place like New York, you can't just do that. You can't go into a press conference and be like, nah, this is the O line sucks, the receivers keep dropping passes, they're not running the right routes, I don't have a running game, we need to get better alignment, all this shit. Like it's not a good look. And in a large market like New York and Dallas and LA, that shit, it doesn't fly. Like, the media is not going to take it, players aren't going to take it, the fans definitely aren't going to take it. So realistically, I think the writing was on the wall for Sanders when he fell out of the first round and the top of the second round went and he hadn't gone. I think because the Steelers didn't pick until the third round, and with them not taking him in the first, I didn't see them taking him in the third because they needed a running back, and they ended up taking Caleb Johnson, which is exactly what I was expecting them to do when that pick came up. Um, yeah, just he just fell, and that wasn't surprising based on all the facts that have come out since then. But those are my general comments on that situation. Hopefully in the future, players or college players are able to learn from this and make sure that they understand the pre-draft process matters. What you do in those top 30 visits matter. The people drafting you are drafting you for their job. Like, if you don't work out, you could get them fired. So it matters to them. The last thing that they want to do is take a risk on a guy who's risky and not have it work, and then they get fired because of that. So yeah, that's about all I have to say to that. So without getting into that more, because I'm sure I'll have a little bit more to say about the situation when I get to the Browns division, let's start with the 2025 draft classes in the NFC East. Now, I'm going to start with the team with the highest pick, as I'm going to try to do throughout. So we're going to start with the Giants, who had pick number 3. They took Abdul Carter, Penn State. Easy pick, a home run pick. A lot of people had him as the top player in the draft. I certainly did. I had him as the top player in the draft. Some people had him too, behind Travis Hunter. I'll get into Hunter when I get to the Jaguars, but the only real bad thing you can say about this pick is that they just drafted Thibodeau a few years ago. I believe they exercised his 5th-year option, and they have Brian Burns they just paid. In my opinion, you can never have too much pass rushers, especially when you have the quarterbacks that you have in that division. Dak Prescott might not be elite, but he's still a good quarterback. Jaden Daniels looks like the next big thing at quarterback, and Jalen Hurts, and that Eagles offense is just killer. So you can never have too many pass rushers. It's very likely that Thibodeau could kick inside, into a 5-tech or a 3-tech in like a NASCAR package on third down or obvious pass downs, and all 3 of them get to be on the field with Dexter Lawrence, which is just great. So home run pick, easy pick. I'm not gonna pick it apart any further. But moving on to the big story of this whole class, Jackson Dart, they traded up. When I get to the Falcons, I'll rip them for their trade, but I think the Giants did a good job of not giving up a lot in the trade. They came out and said in their press conference that it was important to them to be able to keep pick 67, and they did. They gave up pick 99, they gave up pick 34, their top of the second round pick, and then they give a third next year, which isn't nothing, but it's not a first, which the Falcons had to give up. So good job. They got their guy. They seem very happy with him. I am a fan of his projection. I think that he has the potential to be like a Jordan Love type of player. Whereas he sits for a year, because he's very clearly going to sit for this year. and that's what he needed. So I think he goes to a good destination, and the Giants potentially get their quarterback of the future. But then with pick 65 that they had in the third round, they go with interior defensive lineman Darius Alexander from Toledo. I like the pick. I had Alexander as a fringe first rounder, so he fell to them in the third round, and they get a interior presence they kind of needed, not desperately, but they kind of needed it. In the fourth round, they get Cam Scatabo, one of my favorite players in this draft. He is a scat back. He's got some power. He can catch the ball. He can throw the ball. He'll be a weapon for Daboll's offense back there with Tracy at running back. In the fifth round, they got Marcus Bowe, for offensive tackle, interior offensive lineman from Purdue. Name of his game was versatility. The Giants came out and said they could take him. They were going to possibly take him in the fourth round. He fell to them in the fifth round, and I had him as a third round talent. So good for them there. And then two shot in the darks at the end of the draft in Thomas Vidone the second and cornerback Corey Black from Oklahoma State. I don't want to spend too much time on later round draft picks, but a tight end with some tools and a cornerback that makes some plays in the ball, not a bad place to go. So overall, I think the Giants got really good value, and they should be setting themselves up for a brighter future. But now let's move on to the Cowboys. The Cowboys, with their first pick, took guard Tyler Booker from Alabama. Now, I think that he fits what they need. Zach Martin just retired, so they needed a guard to fill his spot. I love his makeup. He seems to be a leader. He's a full-on mauler, but he doesn't have a lot of athleticism, which worries me a little bit. Now, the Cowboys' track record shows that they'll be able to develop Booker, and he'll be a good player. But it does seem coming out of the draft that they wanted a playmaker. They just weren't able to land one. I can't remember who said it, but I believe they were interested in T-Mac, who went to the Panthers at 12, but obviously he didn't fall to him. So, I don't blame them for not going elsewhere. Maybe they could have taken a tackle instead, but Booker clearly fills a need for them, so I'm not going to rip him for it. And the 44th pick in the second round, they took Donovan Ezuroku, edge rusher from Boston College. I have mixed feelings on him. I didn't have him as high as other people, so to me, this is a little bit of a reach. He's one of those guys that I think he is what he is, which is like a rotational pass rusher, or like a two-down lineman. So in the second round, I don't think the value's here, but there was a little bit of a run on edge rushers that happened, so not terrible. Their third round pick at number 76 is Siobhan Ravel from East Carolina. I love this pick. I had Ravel I think I had him in my first round in the mock draft. The whole time the draft was happening, I was saying to myself, like, why hasn't Ravel gone yet? And then eventually he did go to the Cowboys at 76. I think they get good value here. There were some injury concerns that made him fall in the draft. So hopefully he's able to be healthy and show the talent that he just, in my eyes, clearly has. And then going down the next picks, they had two picks in the fifth round, with the highlight being Jaden Blue, the running back from Texas. He should get some looks in the preseason and at training camp and possibly be able to top Miles Sanders and Javonte Williams by the end of the year. I would not be surprised if he leads the team in touches out of the backfield. They took some flyers on some guys, a tackle from Oregon, a D tackle from UCLA, another D tackle from Maryland, a running back from Clemson. And Shamar Jones is the linebacker from Florida. He should be good too. So overall, I think they did okay. I would have liked them to have seen them go somewhere else in the second round, but can't fault them. They needed to replace Dexter Lawrence's production, and they are hoping that they got their guy with Ezuruku. So let's move on to the Commanders. Now, they went a little surprising with the first round. They took tackle Josh Conerly Jr. from Oregon. Now, I say surprising because he is a career left tackle at Oregon. He'll now be asked to move to the right side with Tunsil there at left tackle that they just traded for. So we'll see how that transformation goes. Conerly was probably the most prototypical tackle that there was in this class. And he particularly excels, I believe it is, in pass protection. So, they got a good player there at number 29, and they helped to protect Jaden Daniels, which is of the utmost importance. In the second round, they got really good value in the 61st pick. They got Trey Amos, the corner from Ole Miss. I think that he'll slot right in opposite Lattimore at their corner on the outside. Really good in bump and run, pressed coverage. So, he'll be able to help lock down the receivers in the NL East. The Eagles have a couple guys, Giants have a couple guys, Cowboys have a couple guys. So I think this more was a bigger need for them. So I'm glad they were able to get that. They took a receiver, Jalen Lane, in the fourth round. I'm it doesn't impress me. It doesn't wave me either way. I don't think they needed a receiver, but they could use them. It's kind of just like an pick overall. And then in the sixth and seventh round, they took a linebacker from UCLA and a running back from Arizona. I would have liked to have seen them get an edge rusher at some point. Instead, they went off-ball linebacker and running back. Now, that would have been nice. I probably would have liked to have seen them take a flyer on a receiver with one of these later picks and have picked a running back in the fourth. Because the off-ball linebacker, I understand, in the sixth, this wasn't a great off-ball linebacker class. And, yeah, I would have liked to see them go edge rusher or running back in the fourth round and taking the receiver in the seventh. But, beggars can't be choosers. So I think that the Commanders did okay. The top of their draft is very strong. They only had 5 picks. So, and 2 of them were 200 picks in. So, they could have done worse. But, yeah, I don't love their fourth round pick, which I think just stands out as a black eye to me. But then the last team in this division is the Eagles. They traded up with the Chiefs to take Jihad Campbell. They supposedly did this. They gave up just a fifth round pick. They supposedly did this because other teams were wanting to trade up for a defender, and they were worried that someone would trade with the Chiefs because the Chiefs are notorious for trading down in the first round. I believe this is this is a long time in a row, like 6 or 7 years, that Reed has done this, has traded back at the draft in the first round. So they take Campbell. Injury concerns aside, very athletic linebacker, should be able to get eased onto the field a little bit with them re-signing Bond, but great weapon for them on defense. Andrew Mekuba was the second round pick for them out of Texas, safety. He should basically slot into the CJ Gardner-Johnson position in that defense and be a playmaker just like he was at Texas. In the fourth round, they took an interior defensive lineman, which is a depth piece for them with how their linemen currently go. They took a corner in the fifth round, a linebacker also in the fifth round, a center in the fifth round. All 3 guys just seem like depth pieces to me. They took their token Georgia guy, as they always do, who he might be able to surprise some people. I do like Mondon Jr. Drew Kendall, really good depth piece for them to have on the interior line, as he had a good college career at Boston College. And then their later round picks, they had 4 sixth round picks. They took the quarterback McCord from Syracuse, developmental prospect. Two tackles actually. They took Hinton from Michigan, Williams from Texas. Some depth pieces. Hopefully they can develop one of them to be Lane Johnson's replacement long term. And then took an edge rusher with their last pick, who just, flyer type, something similar to what I think the Commanders should have done, excuse me. But overall, I think that they did a good job splitting between, they had a lot of later picks. Like, they have from the 5th to 6th round, they had, 7 picks? 7 picks from the 5th to 6th rounds. And basically from pick 111, when they had in 4th round, to pick 209, they had 8 picks. So I think they did a good job getting depth. I think a majority of these players will make their roster, with the exception possibly being maybe one of the tackles. I don't know if they're planning to bounce one of them inside to help, like they did with when they got Becton last year. They bounced him to right guard, topped him out there. So we'll see what happens there. But I think they got 2 defensive starters at the top of the draft, which is what they came in needing the most. So can't fault them there. Moving on to the NFC North, we have the Chicago Bears, who picked at 10. Now they, before I get into specific players, their draft screams, Ben Johnson is here. I think they took guys that you very clearly can compare to guys that he had with Detroit. Now, they did not do what I was expecting, which they did not draft a running back with any of their second or fourth or fifth round picks. They ended up taking Kyle Mungai from Rutgers in the seventh round. Now, I do like how tough he runs. He's not the most athletic, but he runs incredibly tough. And I see a lot. This is also the connection to Rutgers, but see a lot of Pacheco in the way that he plays. He did have a better year 2 seasons ago than last year, which I think Rutgers as a program also had a better year 2 years ago than last year. But I think that he has a potential to make an impact. I don't think Ben Johnson is directly tied to DeAndre Swift, but Loveland in the first, a little surprising they didn't go with Warren, but Loveland is the more complete player as he is a better blocker than Warren is. Not that Warren's a bad blocker, but Loveland's a better blocker. And Loveland screams Laporta to me. So they'll run a lot of two tight end sets, a lot of 12 sets, as they're called. Two tight ends, two receivers, and a running back in the backfield. They'll run a lot of that. They have the great talent on the field. I mean, if you look at that positioning, you'll now have Loveland, Komet, um, Odunze, and Moore, and then Swift in the backfield with Williams at quarterback. But then moving on to their second round pick, they took Luther Burden in the third from Mizzou. Um, that screams that they just got their Amon-Ra. He's a slot receiver. He's a tough player. He had a down year. That's what made him fall into the second round. He was like a clear first round talent coming into the season. Then he just had a bad year at Mizzou. So knocked him down a little bit. He goes to the Bears at the 39th pick, which, good on them. They got their Amon-Ra to really completely finish off that offense, outside of running back, of course. With the 56th pick, as they traded back from their spot at 41, I believe it was, they took a tackle, Trapilo from Boston College. I didn't have Trapilo this high, so I have him a little bit as a reach here, but this was a draft of fit, and if he can fit at one of those tackle spots, then, or even as a swing tackle, then, I can't fault them there. At 62, they take their first defensive player. They take Shamar Turner from Texas A&M. Solid player. Doesn't blow me away. Starting caliber. Sure, I guess is where his potential is. Kind of an uninspiring pick. I would have personally gone with Darius Alexander, the guy the Giants got instead at this spot. But like I said with Trapilo, this is a fit draft, so you draft for fit. Then in their fourth round, they took a linebacker, Hippolyte, second from Maryland, off-ball linebacker. They need someone next to Edwards and next to Edmonds, especially I believe Edmonds had some injury issues last year. So, hopefully he can develop into that. In the fifth, sixth, and seventh, or we already talked about the seventh round, but in the fifth and sixth round, they took a cornerback, Zoff Frazier from Utah. And then the sixth round, they took a guard, Luke Newman from Michigan State. Both depth pieces. They have a pretty good corner room over there in Chicago. So, Frazier can slot in there as like the special teams guy or the second nickel. And then Luke Newman as the guard is just a depth piece there. So good class for them. They very clearly went into it knowing who they wanted. Clearly, because they took Loveland, they could have expected him to be there. And then also knowing what their identity is going to be, like what they want it to be, and knowing that they need to find out about Caleb Williams as quickly as possible. And the draft showed it. But moving on to the next team that drafted is the Packers. They drafted at pick 23. They took Matthew Golden. Now, obviously, the draft was in Green Bay, so that added a lot of like the hubbub to it. But I wouldn't go like screaming home to buy a Matthew Golden jersey if you're a Packers fan. He is very similar to Xavier Worthy last year, whereas like you see the athletic ability and you see the talent, but the production doesn't exactly match because he's a very raw receiver. He needs to learn how to run the full route tree. He needs to learn how to separate, how to beat press, and fully utilize his speed, as there are times where it doesn't look like he's running a 4.28 or 4.29. But that can come with time. He's not going to be expected to be a number one weapon in Green Bay. He can play behind Dobbs, and he can play behind Reed and Watson if he's able to get healthy. And they also have Kraft and Musgrove out there to play tight end. So, they have weapons out there. Just another toy for LaFleur and Love to play with, which will be good for them. Hopefully, Golden develops similar to how Worthy developed last year with the Chiefs. In the second round, they took a tackle, Anthony Belton. I feel similar to this, like I did with the Bears. I didn't have him this high. There was a run on tackles. Everybody wants to get their guy, and it looks like the Packers got their guy. So hopefully, he's able to help them out. Probably just be a backup swing tackle to start his career. Um, but there's nothing wrong with that. Guys on the offensive line, sometimes they take some time to develop, so not a problem really there. Third round, 87th pick, they take Savion Williams. I don't understand this pick really. I think that they have a good number of receivers. They took Golden already. Why going Williams in the third round doesn't make sense to me. Nothing against the player. It's more the fit and the, I guess, positional need in a draft where, you know, despite it being like a fit draft and guys drafting for what they wanted, I guess that led to some players falling. And, I think they could have taken advantage of that, got some help on defense instead of taking another receiver, but they did. So hopefully Williams is able to pay off for them. In the fourth round, they took two edge rushers, both rotational guys at best. In the sixth round, they took an interior defensive lineman, probably just a space eater, at least early in his career. And then in the seventh round, they took two players, a cornerback from Tulane and an offensive tackle from Cincinnati. Similar to most guys drafted in the sixth or seventh round, developmental players that they get picked as like an early choice at UDFAs. So they see some traits or some talent that they feel like they might be able to develop, and that's why they went. Now let's move on to the Vikings draft. They also had a small class. They only had 5 picks, and only 2 in the first 2 days. So they took Donovan Jackson, a guard from Ohio State. He'll be a plug and play type guy. They need to protect J.J. McCarthy and be able to run the ball better behind what was a shaky offensive line last year. But he should slot in there very nicely. In the third round, they took wide receiver Tay Felton, I believe that's how you say his name, from Maryland. Don't love it, don't hate it. I had guys ranked higher than him here, but I'm probably going to keep saying this draft was all about fit, so hopefully the fit's there for them. In the fifth round, they took edge rusher Tyrion Ingram Dawkins from Georgia. I had him ranked higher than this, so I have this as a little bit of a steal. Probably had like a fringe third, more likely fourth round pick grade on him, so good on them getting good value for a rotational edge rusher in the fifth round. In the sixth round, they had 2 picks. They took a linebacker King from Penn State and a tight end Gavin Bartholomew from Pitt. I like the pick of Bartholomew. He can step in immediately and at least be a blocking tight end for them. He's also got really good size. And I almost see him like the tight end they currently have as a backup behind Hawkinson, Josh Oliver, but Bartholomew has more size. So, I think that they're going to have something to work with. Kevin O'Connell will be able to work with Bartholomew, and hopefully it'll pay out for them. But overall, with the picks, the lack of picks that they had, lack of high picks that they had, I think that they did a good job filling a hole immediately. They found someone who fell a little bit in the fifth, and I would like someone else other than Felton in the third, but beggars can't be choosers. But our last team in the NFC North is the Detroit Lions. Quick thing on the Lions, they don't care about people's draft boards. They fill their holes and they draft who they think will fit their system no matter what. Um, so they take a mammoth of a man at defensive tackle in Tyleek Williams. He will be a presence and a space eater on the inside, help free up those linebackers and those edge rushers to come off the edge, and particularly help them in run support. In the second round, they take one of my favorite players in this draft overall, Tate Ratledge, guard from Georgia. He absolutely showed out. Him and most of the interior offensive linemen from Georgia showed out at the combine, but he particularly stood out. He should slot right into the right guard spot that Zeitler had last year and probably dominate. Honestly, he very athletic, like I said, and yeah, just very athletic. He'll be able to fit their scheme very, very well and probably dominate out of the gate. Potentially more than Booker does with the Cowboys, but we'll see what happens there. In the third round, they take a little bit of a projection player. They take Isaac Tisla, I believe how you say it, from Arkansas. He is a completely projectable player as he ran he ran at like a 4.35 40 or 4.37 40 at like 6'4", like 210. So great body for a receiver. Very limited production at Arkansas, which is something that you don't typically see out of a third round pick. But like I said, the Lions don't care about your draft board, so they take the guy that they think is best, and now they'll have time to develop Tesla and hopefully turn him into probably the eventual Jamison Williams replacement, as there's some trade rumors out there. Now, on day 3 of the draft, they had 4 picks. They get another guard in the 5th round, Miles Frazier. I like this pick as well. He'll probably be their backup guard with eyes maybe on their left guard spot in the future. We'll see what happens there. In the 6th round, they get edge rusher Ahmed Hassanein. I like him. He showed a lot of good bend and good athleticism off the edge. He will probably just be like a pass rush only player to start his career. They need to develop him against the run. And, hopefully they're able to do it, as Aiden Hutchinson needs some help off the edge there. In the 7th round, they had 2 picks. They took 2 Georgia players, safety Dan Jackson and wide receiver Dominic Lovett. I feel okay with this, I guess. I would have liked to have seen them take a corner instead of a safety, but if they played Branch more in the box as a linebacker, or they let him maybe get some slot reps, then I could see how Jackson could come in and play. And then Lovett, similar to Tesla, just a projectable player that they think might be able to turn into something, which is, I guess, what the Lions are always hoping they can do with the guys that they draft. But so far, their record is pretty stellar. Moving on to the NFC South, starting off with the Panthers, who had a very good draft, in my opinion. They started off with T-Mac at pick number 8, Arizona. Big body. I have him as the best receiver in the class. Very polished, good at the point of attack. He was getting knocked a little bit for having not as good of a year, I guess, as the previous season, this past year in college. So that was starting to knock him a little bit. I also think there was some prospect fatigue with him, as him and Burden were viewed as the top 2 guys coming into this season. But he ends up going number 8, and I think that Bryce Young will be happy they went that way. In the 2nd round, they take Nick Scorton, edge rusher from Texas A&M. They got great value here. I had him fringe 1st round player, probably top of the 2nd round. He ends up falling a little bit to them, not too far, but I think they got good value for the spot that they took him, as they need edge rushers on that defense. Speaking of, in the 3rd round, they take Princely Umanmielen, I believe is how you say his name, from Ole Miss. There was people that had him as a 2nd round talent. I did not have him as a 2nd round talent, so I have him basically as a 3rd round talent, which is where they took him. So I think they got good value again at a position of need, which is very good for them, that they were able to get both guys and at positions that they needed. In the 4th round, they took Trevor Etienne, running back from Georgia. This is a pick that I like the player. I don't like the fit. They took Brooks last year in the 2nd round, recovering from injury. They paid Chuba Hubbard So why do you need ETN? I think that it is a redundant pick, similar to one of the other teams I talked about earlier. But that's what they did. So we'll see. They took a safety, Lathan Ransom from Ohio State in the 4th round as well. I'm kind of in between about it. I see good ball skills. I see a decent tackler. So I guess as a 4th round player, you can take it. In the 5th round, they had 2 picks. They took Cameron Jackson, defensive tackle from Florida, and tight end Mitchell Evans from Notre Dame. Um, it's probably one of those situations where I would have liked to have seen them take a tight end earlier, despite the fact that I think that they do like what they have in Jatavian Sanders, who they took last year in the draft. But we'll see if Mitchell Evans can get it done, and Cameron Jackson, run stopper, got a little bit of pass rushing chops. Maybe he can get some 3rd down reps in there, but really just to help Derek Brown on the inside there in that Panthers defense, where their defense line needed a lot of help and they've gotten a lot of pieces. And in the 6th round with their final pick, they took Jimmy Horn Jr. from Colorado, wide receiver. I like this pick a lot. I think he got hurt by the fact that Sanders was his quarterback and he had issues with not wanting to throw the ball deep, or I don't know what happened there. But I think that he's a good deep ball threat and should be able to maybe make some spot plays on this team this season. But let's move on to the Saints, who picked at number 9. They took Calvin Banks Jr., offensive tackle from Texas. I liked this pick. The tackles went quickly when Membu went at 7 and Campbell went at 4. It was probable that Banks would get pushed up the board. He gets pushed all the way up to number 9, which is perfectly fine for me. I see him as a pure left tackle and a great addition to the Saints offensive line that needs tackles, especially after I believe Ramczyk retired. And then we get to the pick that I personally do not understand, and that is Tyler Show, quarterback from Louisville in the 2nd round, 40th overall pick. If Carr's hurt and out for the year, I more understand this pick. Show probably needs to sit. The fact that he turns 26 in September means that he can't sit for long, and I don't like the idea of taking quarterbacks that are aged like that. It's not exactly Brandon Weeden from a number of years ago, but it's pretty close. Considering the Giants took Dart, was it 15 picks higher than that, and he's 21. This guy will be 26 by the time we get to October. But we'll see. I'm sure he'll be in camp fighting for the starting spot with Spencer Rattler. So good luck to him. In the 3rd round, they took interior defensive lineman Vernon Broughton from Texas. Decent pick here. A little bit of a reach, in my opinion. Probably had him as a fringe 3rd, more likely 4th round pick. But they saw their guy and they got him. They needed some help on the defensive interior. They were a little weak against the run last year, and this should help. This pick should help them with that. In the 3rd round, they also took safety Jonas Sanker from Virginia. I see this as a complete reach. I don't have Sanker going this high, nearly at all. So I think this is a reach, but hopefully he's able to live up to the draft position that the Saints put him at. In the 4th round, they had 2 picks. They took defensive players here as well. Linebacker Stutzman from Oklahoma and cornerback Riley from Louisville. Both players rotational type to begin their career. Maybe they can progress forward. They might get pressed into duty a little bit more because this is a young team with not a lot of money. So they might get pressed into duty, and hopefully they can respond by making some plays. They had 3 more picks, 1 in the 6th, 2 in the 7th. In the 6th, they took a running back, Devin Neal, depth piece behind Kamara, and Kendre Miller. And in the 7th round, they had 2 really late 7th round picks. They took a tight end, Matevo from UCLA, and an edge rusher, Diggs from Syracuse. Like I've said before, more like an advance on a UDFA here. So, overall, a decent class. They very clearly had a plan at the top in getting their quarterback and getting a tackle, and then they basically went defense the rest of the way, which, is fair. They need help on defense. But moving on to our next pick, we have the Falcons. The Falcons with their first pick, And in some of the more extreme moves in the first round, they took an edge rusher, Jalen Walker, at pick 15. I like this pick. A lot of people had him as a potential top 10 guy, maybe going as high as number 8 or number 7. He falls to them at 15, probably because he's more of a tweener. He doesn't have the prototypical size you want in an edge rusher. Um, but hopefully the Falcons are able to mix and match him between off-ball linebacker and edge rusher like he did at Georgia and get the most value for him. Now, the controversial pick for the Falcons class here is edge rusher James Pierce Jr. from Tennessee. Now, off the cuff, I like Pierce. I like his athleticism. I like his bend. I like his game. But giving up a first round pick next year for an extra first this year while also losing your second, I just think was too much. I understand going from, I think they were at 52 to get up to 26 is going to cost more than the Giants going from 34 to 25. But a first next year is just is ludicrous in my mind. But hopefully Pierce is able to make it count for them. They do need edge rushers, so they got two of the best in the class in my mind. In the third round, they got a really good player in Xavier Watts, a safety from Notre Dame. He'll get to play that center field spot and allow Jesse Bates to work kind of over the middle in that robber position in that Raheem Morris defense. In the fourth, they got another safety, Billy Bowman Jr. out of Oklahoma. If you know Raheem Morris, he does like to run a little bit of three safety look, so this isn't the most surprising thing. However, I don't think this was the way to go. I think it's another fourth round pick. It seems to be a trend happening here. Another fourth round pick where they could have gone elsewhere. Instead, they probably just let their board talk to them, which is good to a point, but between the 118th pick and the 218th pick, they had nothing. They had their fourth round pick and they had their seventh round pick. That was it. So taking two safeties back to back like this seems meaningless to me when you don't have this many, when you don't have an abundance of picks. Like it's not like you were the Eagles and you had 5 picks or 6 picks at the 6th and 7th round. Like you just didn't. You had one. So, it's kind of redundant. In the 7th round, they took tackle Jack Nelson from Wisconsin, depth piece, swing tackle. Maybe they'll kick him inside. He can do some damage, but we'll see what happens there. Overall, I think that they swang for the fences, which I can appreciate. They got good value with Watts. I liked that Walker fell to them. They should use him well. I just wish they didn't give up a first next year to get Pierce Jr. There's no one can say if he would have gone before the top of the second or before like the 31st pick, the one the Eagles had, but they get their guy, which I'm sure they appreciate, but giving him a first round pick next year might come back to bite them. We'll see. And the last team in the NFC South is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They went a little bit surprising in the first round. They took wide receiver Emeka Egbuka. Now, he should be able to fill an immediate role on the outside for them. He is a pro's pro. He's grades out as one of the best people, according to a lot of people that have talked to him and interviewed him. And probably wide receiver number 2. I think I had him as wide receiver number 2. I'm not including Hunter. So decent value here. I think if Egbuka falls a little bit, there's probably like 3 teams lining up to take him. So they get a good player, a potential replacement for Godwin if he can't stay healthy. But a little bit of the rich getting richer at receiver position there. But in the second round, they get really good value with cornerback Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame. He potentially could have gone higher, so people had him even in the first round in their mocks. I had him as a second round talent, but he fell all the way to 53 to them. Great fit, very physical corner. It should be able to cause some problems in the NFC South with the receivers they have in there. In the third round, they doubled down with corner and taking Jacob Parrish from Kansas State. I like this. I wonder if this was kind of a necessity because of where they went in the first round, but they needed secondary help. They got 2 corners they liked. I really like Morrison. I'm okay on Parrish, so I'm not gonna rip him for it. In the fourth round, they took edge rusher David Walker. I think it's a little bit of a reach. especially when you take into consideration in the 5th round, they took edge rusher Elijah Roberts, who I think fell to them and was a steal. So I guess that evens out there, and they get 2 guys they can rotate in, at least early in their career. In the 7th round, they took one of the probably like the weirdest, I guess I could say, wide receiver prospects this year in Tez Johnson. I say weird because he weighed in at like 155 pounds, but then ran like a 4.5. So just baffling, but his production speaks for itself as he had a really good college career over there at Oregon. Moving on to the NFC South, we have the 49ers who are up first. With the 11th pick, they took Mykel Williams, edge rusher from Georgia. I like the fit here. He is a little bit raw as an edge rusher, but they should be able to develop him as a secondary edge rusher behind Bosa or across from Bosa. And really, he just needs to beat the one-on-ones that he'll get as Bosa will get doubled. And they needed an edge rusher really bad across from Bosa. So, nice pick here. Also, on the defensive line, their 2nd-round pick, Alfred Collins from Texas. Alfred Collins should be able to be a little bit of a force on the interior. Would I have gone with him over the other options available at this point? I'm not 100% sure, but I'm not going to knock them for it. They got their guy. It was a scheme fit thing, not a big, not that big of a problem with it in my mind. In the 3rd round, they got off-ball linebacker Nick Martin from Oklahoma State. I think this is a reach. I had him as a day 3 pick, and he goes here in the 3rd round. Same thing for pick number 100, Upton Stout from West Kentucky. I think it's a reach. Again, this was a fit draft. This was not an ultra talented draft, so reaching is not the worst thing in the world, but not exactly what you want to see when you are looking at a potential another step back as the 49ers are this upcoming season. In the 4th round, they had 2 picks. They took defensive tackle CJ West from Indiana and wide receiver Jordan Watkins from Ole Miss. I like Watkins. He had good production with Dart as his quarterback, so maybe he can step in there and fill some of the space that Deebo Samuel's leaving behind. Good value there. I don't get taking CJ West when you already took Alfred Collins and you have other needs, but they doubled down and they get a rotational interior defensive lineman. In the 5th, they had 2 picks. They took running back Jordan James from Oregon. I'm never going to doubt any running back that Shanahan has on his roster. He has shown that no matter who he puts out there, they will get it done. So I expect the same to happen with James. They also took safety Marquise Siegel from Kansas State. They might be able to turn him into something. They do a pretty good job over there with safeties out there in San Francisco, developing them at least. So, maybe there'll be something there. But in the 7th round is where I think their most interesting pick came. At pick 227, they took quarterback Curtis Rourke. He kind of had a breakout year at Indiana, made him into a more legit prospect. I had him as like a 5th, 6th round guy, so they fell to him in the 7th. And it'll be interesting to see if a similar situation to Purdy happens here with Rourke, as I don't think Rourke has as much experience as Purdy did, but I like the potential that Rourke presents. So we'll see what happens there. In the 7th, they also took Connor Colby, guard from Iowa, and wide receiver Junior Bergen from Montana. Similar to other 7th-round picks, just picking their UDFAs early. Overall, for the Niners, I think they very clearly asked Robert Saleh what he wanted, and then loaded up on it as they took 5 defensive players with their first 5 picks, and was it 6 overall out of their 11 picks. So their defense had some problems last year. They brought in Saleh to help fix them, and then drafted Saleh a bunch of players for him to hopefully develop. But moving on, we have the Cardinals at pick number 16. They took Walter Nolan, who has some of the biggest potential along the interior defensive line, probably second behind Mason Graham, in my opinion. The issues for him that held him back was the off the field stuff. There was a lot of things about him not being fully engaged throughout the process in games and not wanting to practice hard and stuff like that. So that pushed him down some people's boards, but obviously the Cardinals were not protrude by that. They take him here at 16, and I think that he has the potential to be like a top 5 player in this class. So good for them, as they need help along that defensive line. They also get one of the biggest steals, in my opinion, in the second round at pick 47. They take cornerback Will Johnson, who for a long part of the draft process, I had as a top 10 pick. So his injury obviously was a big concern to a lot of teams. That's why he failed reportedly. And the Cardinals really needed a good corner, and they get one here for a lot less than was expected, as I didn't even expect him to be there at 16, let alone at 47. So really good value for the Cardinals there at a position of need, which is huge. They then follow that up in the third round, taking Jordan Burch from Oregon. This is about where I had Burch going, so I'm not surprised by going there. I think that he will be a good piece on the defensive line opposite of Josh Sweat, who just signed in free agency with the Cardinals. In the fourth, they take linebacker Cody Simon from Ohio State. I like that he played at Ohio State. There's some leadership skills there that people have noted. So we'll see what he's able to do in Arizona. I see more potential than the other fourth round picks out of Simon. Here in the fifth, they took cornerback Denzel Burke, which is big. I like his tape from Ohio State. Not exactly the most athletic out there. It's probably why it wasn't picked higher, but we'll see what he's able to do. There comes a point where you have to weigh the game tape versus the potential, and when does the game tape matter? When does the potential matter? And I think the game tape like overpowers the athletic potential here with Burke. But moving on in the sixth and seventh round, they took a guard, Hayden Cooper from Texas, and a safety, Katan Crawford from Nevada. I think Cooper might end up getting some looks, probably more of like just a Swiss Army knife interior offensive lineman this year at least. Maybe he can show some things. And then Crawford, I think just advanced UDFA signing. But I think similar to the Niners, they identified that they had an issue. It was their defense, and they attacked it. As with their draft, they had 7 picks. 6 of them were defense, with the one outlier being the guard they took in the 6th round. So hopefully this class is able to help them build a better defense. But moving on to the Seahawks at pick number 18, they have taken Gray Zabel, from North Dakota State. He is a Swiss Army knife offensive lineman, as he has starts at tackle, guard, center, across the board. I would probably expect him to play right tackle to start, possibly kick into guard if needed, but I would expect them to want to maybe play him at right tackle with Cross at left and help to protect Sam Darnold. In the second round, they took Nick Amenwori. They traded up for Nick Amenwori, the safety from South Carolina. This is McDonald getting his Kyle Hamilton. He is an athletic freak. He's an in-the-box safety through and through, a playmaker on the ball, and he should be reminiscent of Cam Chancellor for the Seahawks out there in Seattle. Also in the second round, they took Elijah Arroyo, tight end from Miami. He is a receiving threat out of the tight end position. He breaks tackles, he makes long catches, catch and runs, all that jazz. He's a little bit raw when it comes to blocking and the position in general. So he needs to develop that at the NFL level. But I really like his potential, and I probably would have had him gone by then at that point. So he goes to them at pick 50, and they get just a player. In the third round, they take quarterback Jalen Milroe from Alabama. I absolutely love this pick. Milroe gets to sit for basically 2 years behind Darnold, learn the system, learn to be a better quarterback, which he needs because he is much more like a running back that they're allowing to throw than a pure quarterback at Bama. So it'd be really good for them to be able to develop him to potentially take over for Darnold when Darnold's contract expires. So look out there. Now, they made a lot of picks. They had 3 fifths, 1 sixth, and 3 sevenths. Among these players that they took, Damian Martinez, running back from Miami, looks like he might be able to be something. Who else? They took another tight end, which I thought was interesting, from Alabama, Robbie Oust. And then they took two tackles, Bryce Cabeldu and Mason Richmond as well. So I think that they very clearly, and they also took two receivers. I think they very clearly identified where they had their holes, and they said, let's kind of throw our hats into the ring as much as possible. As they took two receivers, two tackles, and two tight ends. So their end of their class not as impressive as the front of their class, but I think from I don't think anyone had a better day two than the Seahawks. I think you can kind of combine that with the fact that they got Zabel, who should be a plug and play tackle for them, and say that they have probably one of the strongest tops of the classes from this year. Just looking at it without having any games be played. But last but not least, our final NFC West and NFC team, the Los Angeles Rams, they traded out of the first round to the Falcons, picked up a first round pick next year, which will be hugely valuable to them if they want to go with a quarterback next year. But this year, they took a tight end, Terrence Ferguson from Oregon. I like him, but this is where I would have taken Arroyo instead of Ferguson. I like Arroyo a lot better than I like Ferguson. I had like a third round grade on Ferguson, but the Rams have been looking for a tight end. It was rumored that they wanted Bowers last year, so they've wanted a tight end for a while. McVay wanted one. He identified Ferguson as their guy, and they went out and got him. So no fault there, except for my preference would have been for them to go Arroyo. In the third round, with the 98th pick, they take edge rusher Josiah Stewart, about where I had him going. So no harm, no foul there. And they get another person to rotate in there to rush the passer, which I would not doubt their ability to find good edge rushers, as they very quickly found a bunch in the last year or two. In the fourth round, they take running back Jarquez Hunter from Auburn. Probably at best just a spell back for Kyren Williams. In the fifth round, they took two guys, Ty Hamilton, defensive tackle from Ohio State. I am kind of just on him. And they took linebacker Chris Paul Jr. from Ole Miss in the fifth round as well. I like that value a lot. I probably had him as like a fourth, maybe third round pick. So getting him in the fifth round, I think is really good value for the Rams. And he should be able to make a difference for them this season beyond special teams. And then their last pick in the seventh round, pick 242, they took Kanata Mumfield from Pitt. Like I've said before, just an early UDFA pick there. And I don't know that much about the player, so not much to say. But overall, I think the Rams did what they do, which is they take the guys that they know fit their system, similar to the Lions, and someone's going to surprise them. I think Ferguson will be good. I think Stewart will be good. And I think Paul Jr. will also be able to surprise some people. So overall, a pretty good class considering they didn't use their first. They got a first next year, which I think is the biggest plus coming out of this draft. Moving on to the AFC, we're going to start out west with the Vegas Raiders. Now, I said going into this draft that Janty to them at pick 6 was the easiest bet that you could make outside of the top 3. It cashed, and Janty is a Raider. I think part of it was going into the draft, they didn't have a running back really. They didn't make an effort to sign one. They didn't, have anyone really at that position. For Pete Carroll, who all of his teams had a good running back or good running backs, going back to his USC days. So I think Janty is going to be a bell cow for them and help to hopefully stabilize that offense behind Geno Smith. And the second guy that they drafted in Josh Betch from TCU, not my favorite receiver in this draft, which is not much of a problem. He kind of fits what they like, which is like the taller, more like possession type receivers. So, he should be a decent fit next to Jacoby Mayer out there in Vegas. Their first of 3 third-round picks at 68 was cornerback Darian Porter. I absolutely love this pick. They needed a corner. Porter could have gone in the second round, in my opinion. He falls to him in the third round. great value there. We should be able to start immediately for them. At the end of the third round, pick 98 and 99 respectively, they take guard Caleb Rogers from Texas Tech and then tackle Charles Grant from William & Mary. I have these two weirdly in like opposite situations. I think Rogers was a reach and Grant was a steal. So evens out. Like I've said, this is a fit draft. I think they got the guys that they wanted to help their offensive line, and their offensive line needed the help. So hopefully they're able to be plug and plays or help to make a difference on that offensive line out there in Vegas. In the fourth, they took wide receiver Dante Thornton from Tennessee. I like Thornton. He's a deep ball guy. He's got speed. I believe he's a little bit of a taller, sturdier receiver as well. So should be good to be able to get some jump balls, get some deep routes, and I guess be their like fourth receiver out there in Vegas. They did have 3 6th-round picks, as they took a defensive tackle, J.J. Pegues from Ole Miss, quarterback Tommy Mellett from Montana State, and quarterback Cam Miller from North Dakota State. Now, I will say they didn't just take 2 quarterbacks. They took Mellett, who is not really a quarterback. He's more of like a triple option type guy who I believe he scored a lot of touchdowns, so expect him to be more like a Taysom Hill out there in Vegas, and Cam Miller to be the actual quarterback. And then in the 7th round, they took linebacker Cody Lindenberg from Minnesota, who fits what they normally like in their linebackers, so I think that he might be able to outperform his 7th round draft position. But let's move on to the Broncos, who had a weird draft, in my opinion. Jahdae Barron, the cornerback from Texas, fell to them partially because I think his best fit in the NFL is as a slot corner. That's where he played for most of his career before moving to the outside this past year. But he is more of a zone corner as well. So for that reason, teams probably passed on him, especially with the depth of cornerback in this class. It's not the most surprising thing that Barron was available at pick 20, and then the Broncos are able to get someone to either go, probably go across from PS2. Sorry, I just completely forgot his name for a second. And in the 2nd round, I think that they reached on a running back with RJ Harvey from UCF. I don't like that he is a limited athletic profile, but at the same time, I'm not exactly going to fault Sean Payton for his choice in drafting running back. He has a very good track record with running backs in the draft. So, I think doubt RJ Harvey and Sean Payton at your own risk. However, in the 3rd round, they took wide receiver Pat Bryant with their first 3rd round pick, and I did not like this pick. I thought it was a blatant reach. I had him as a day 3 talent. They take him the 3rd round pick at 74. I think there were other receivers that could have been better suited for this position, but we'll see. I also don't think that a receiver was as big of a need for them this year, at least, with Sutton not being traded in the offseason as was potentially speculated. Their 2nd pick in the 3rd round, they took Sevion Jones, edge rusher from LSU. I also think this is a reach. It is kind of covered up by the fact that they got edge rusher Quandarius Robinson in the 4th, which I think is decent value. But at the same time, it's a doubling up on edge rusher like this seems redundant. But then again, a lot of teams so far have been doubling up, so maybe that was just kind of a accepted strategy going into this draft. In the 6th round, they took a punter, which I guess good for them. Hopefully, he's able to make the team and not just be a wasted 6th round pick. In the 7th round, they took tight end Caleb Lawner from Utah. The interesting thing about him is he was a dual sport athlete, as he was a basketball player. So think like Julius Thomas, Jimmy Graham type, which for Sean Payton could be huge. So look out for the potential there. Let's move on to the Chargers. With their first pick, they took Omarion Hampton, running back from North Carolina. I fully expect by like mid-season that Hampton is getting a majority of the reps at running back over Najee Harris. Harris was signed to a 1-year deal, and they have no loyalty to him, as well as the fact that I don't think he has a single season averaging over 4 yards per rush. So look for Hampton, who is just a bowling ball of a runner, to eventually supersede Harris and get a majority of the touches at running back. In the second round, they took Trey Harris from Ole Miss at pick 55. I like this pick. I've liked Harris throughout the whole process. However, his limited athletic profile did turn me off on him a little bit. I think this might be a little bit high for Harris, but at the same time, with the other guys available at receiver, I understand it. And he's a really good complement as an X receiver to the like slot Z type receiver that McConkey was for them last year and is. Moving on to the third round, they took defensive tackle Jamari Caldwell from Oregon. I think this is a reach, but they got really good value in the fourth round with edge rusher Kyle Kennard at pick 125 from South Carolina. I had Kennard as a round 3 type talent, potentially round 2 pick, depending on how the board fell. So I think they get really good value with Kennard there to help replace Joey Bosa. Moving on to the later rounds, in the fifth, they had 2 picks. They took a wide receiver, Keandre Lambert Smith from Auburn, and a tight end, Oronde Gadsden II from Syracuse. Both guys are developmental picks. Lambert Smith is a burner, deep ball threat. He might end up with a couple plays here and there this year, but he is a guy that they're going to look to develop more than actually use. And I see Gadsden as very similar. In the sixth, they had 2 picks. They took Branson Taylor from Pitt and safety R.J. Mickens from Clemson, both depth pieces. And then the seventh, they took with pick 256, they took defensive back, I'll call him Trickweez Bridges. He played corner last year for Florida, but a couple sites had him listed as a safety. His big stats, I guess, was that he graded out really well against the run. So some hybrid slot, maybe some safety, some box safety stuff. Look out for that for him. So really interesting gadget for the Harbaugh to use on defense there. But our last team in the AFC West is the Kansas City Chiefs. They started off by trading back 1 spot and still getting their left tackle, Josh Simmons from Ohio State. Now, the interesting thing about Simmons is if he was healthy, he is a borderline top 10 pick. He has played really well at Ohio State. He, like I said, going into this year, he was a top 10 talent potentially. He got hurt, slid him down the draft board a little bit, and the Chiefs get rewarded for, for that injury, as unfortunate as that might sound. In round 2, they get Omar Noman Lott, the interior defensive lineman from Tennessee. Just a space eater with some shiftiness. I like the pick here. Even if it is a little bit of a reach, I still like the pick. He should be able to slot next to Chris Jones and take some pressure off of him, especially against the run. In the third, the 66th pick, they took edge rusher Ashton Gillotte from Louisville. This is a pure pass rush guy. He'll rotate in on third down, basically, in any NASCAR packages they might run. In the third, they also took cornerback Noel Williams from California. They are not a team that I will ever doubt their ability to develop corners. So despite the fact that I didn't have Williams this high, I think you can happily trust Spagnuolo and the Kansas City Chiefs staff to get the most out of Williams. In the fourth round, I think they got a steal at receiver in Jalen Royals from Utah State, who some people had going in the second round, even like the high second round. So really good value there for the Chiefs at receiver, where they could use the extra talent. In the fifth round, they got linebacker Jeffrey Bassa from Oregon, good player, kind of redundant with them re-signing Bolton and having Chenal there as well at linebacker. But maybe he can learn, and they've developed linebackers really well in Kansas City as well. So look out for that. In the seventh round, they took running back Brashard Smith from SMU. I think just a depth piece there. So nothing too like no steal, nothing too bad there. Moving on to the AFC South, we'll start where the draft started with pick number 1 in round number 1, Cam Ward to the Titans. Now, I do think Cam Ward is a little bit of a project. He has a very lazy bottom half with his technique. I wonder if that was because his O-line was good. He played a little bit inferior competition at Miami compared to some other guys. He was kind of afforded the right to do that. So we'll see if that continues in the NFL. If it does, that could be a problem, but he has enough creativity and potential to justify being drafted number 1. And hopefully the Titans get to see that potential get fulfilled. In the second round, at pick 52, they reach, in my opinion, on an edge rusher, Oluwafemi Oladejo from UCLA. I didn't have him this high. Probably had him maybe as a third round pick. So a little bit of a reach, in my opinion, there. In the third round, I think they get a guy that fell a little bit at pick 82 with safety Kevin Winston Jr. from Penn State. I really like his ability to play the ball, play zone coverage, and make plays. And he had a little bit of an injury issue, I believe, towards the end of the year. So that pushed him down some boards. And I think the Titans get their Kevin Byard replacement with Winston Jr. In the fourth round, the Titans had 3 picks. The first pick's a little questionable because of the third pick, but their first pick at 103 was Chimere Dyke from Florida, wide receiver. Their second pick at 120 was tight end Gunnar Helm from Texas, and their third pick was wide receiver Alec Aomanor from Stanford at 136. Now, the reason I say I don't like the first pick is because the third pick kind of makes it redundant. And also, Aomanor, some people had him as a second round talent. Getting him in the fourth at 136 is great. So you could have gone somewhere else at 103, or you could have taken Aomanor at 103 and then got someone else at 136. Or there were other ways to go about this. And I think this just continues the trend of the fourth round just being a weird round where people reach on a bunch of players. But with their last 3 picks in the draft, the Titans take at 167 in the fifth round guard Jackson Slater from Sacramento State. I like the potential here. Smaller school guy who has a chance to outperform his spot just because he was a smaller school guy at Sacramento State. And in the sixth round, they had 2 picks. They took cornerback Marcus Harris at 183 from California and running back Khalil Mullings from Michigan at 188. Um, Different feelings about both picks. Mullings is obviously just injury insurance for Spears and Pollard, who have a little bit of an injury history for both of them. And then Harris, I think, is just a depth piece for their defensive backfield, which is, not a bad thing to get at the end of the draft. But let's move on to the biggest surprise, in my opinion, in this draft, which was the Jaguars trading up from 5 to 1 to get Travis Hunter from Colorado. Now, I think all of Hunter's value, for the most part, comes with being able to do both. So I expect him to do both. Now, whether it is majority defense, gadget offense, or gadget defense, majority offense will remain to be seen. But his ability to make plays on the ball and just overall athleticism is to salivate over, and why the Jaguars made this move. So he will. What happens with him will be something to definitely keep an eye on. But moving on, they had a really good third round of the draft. Now, obviously, they moved their second round pick to get Hunter. So in the third round, they were able to get cornerback Caleb Ransaw from Tulane and offensive tackle Wyatt Millam from West Virginia. I like Millam better than Ransaw, but I do like Ransaw as well. I think they might have been able to get Ransaw in the fourth, which would have helped their whole draft, because I think them taking Tutton, the running back from Virginia Tech, in the fourth round was just unnecessary with them already have ETN and Bigsby. But, that'll remain to be seen. I just don't think a team that had as bad a year as they did last year is able to take the luxury of a pick like that. But, we'll see what happens. Also in the fourth round, they took linebacker Jack Kisser from Notre Dame. I had a hard time evaluating him, so we'll see what he is at the NFL level. Yeah. And then they had 4 more picks, 2 in the sixth, 2 in the seventh. They got edge rusher Jalen McLeod McLeod, something like that. And from Auburn at 194, and at 200 they took safety Rayan Lane the third from Navy. Always love to see Navy guys get taken. And then in the seventh they take center Jonah Monheim from USC, and then at 236 they take LeQuint Allen from Syracuse, another running back, which again doesn't make sense to me for this team, but that's what their class looks like. Again, I think it all hinders on what Hunter's able to do, especially because they traded a first round pick next year and a second round pick this year, as well as their first this year, to get Hunter. So that's where this class will live or die, despite the fact that I think Willem specifically in the third round was a good get for them. But moving on to the Colts were able to stick and pick at 14 and get their guy in tight end Tyler Warren from Penn State. He was expected to go earlier than that. The Colts were reportedly discussing trading up for him. Instead, they're able to stick and pick and take him. I think he will be a huge help for whoever is playing quarterback for Indianapolis this year. In the second round, they take edge rusher JT Tuimoloau from Ohio State. A little bit of a projection here, as Jack Sawyer had a lot more production than JT at Ohio State, but he still played pretty well and he has a projectable frame. So that's what the Colts like. That's kind of their prototype when they draft guys like this. So not too much of a surprise. And then in the third round, at pick 80, they take cornerback Justin Wally. I think this is a little bit of a reach. Wally is out of Minnesota. I think it's a little bit of a reach, but we'll see where it actually lands. In the fourth, they take offensive tackle Jalen Travis from Iowa State. He will be the backup right tackle to Braden Smith, who had some mental health issues at the end of the season last year. Hopefully he's all right, and Travis is able to just be a backup swing tackle, at least to start his career. Another backup that they drafted is running back DJ Giddens, Kansas State at 151, who gets the backup Jonathan Taylor. They took a project quarterback in the sixth round at 189 in Riley Leonard from Notre Dame, who they can also try to develop, as well as Richardson out there at quarterback. And then they took at 190 defensive tackle Tim Smith, who was just a space eater, run defender. And then in the seventh round with their last pick, they take safety Justin Waller from Wisconsin. So overall, pretty good class, good depth pieces for them, and they got their guy in the first, which is huge for them and their ability to hopefully develop Anthony Richardson. But our last team in the AFC South here is the Texans. They traded out of the first round, which is questionable because they needed a tackle, and where they were, a bunch of tackles were available. And unlike the Rams, they didn't get a future first to trade back. So, we'll see what happens. But with their first pick at round 2, pick 34, they take wide receiver Jaden Higgins. And he is a 6'4" beast, athletic, very athletic, actually. He tested out very well at the combine. And he'll be a great complement on the outside, across from Nico Collins. And then at pick 48, they take the tackle that they were looking for in Ariante Ursary from Minnesota. I think Ursary is a little raw, so it's interesting if he needs to step in and be their left tackle immediately, how he will perform. Like I said, I would have rather they had just stayed in the first and taken Simmons or Connerly, but they don't. Instead, they take Ursary here. Hopefully that gamble is able to be paid off for them. Otherwise, Stroud's going to have a hard time in that Texans backfield this year. But at round 3, pick 79, they take wide receiver Jalen Noel, keeping the Iowa State teammates together. Noel is essentially the Tank Dell injury replacement, as he is more of a slot receiver, but very, very athletic, very quick, very fast. So he should be able to have some success in Dell's place if Dell is unable to return from his 2 devastating knee injuries that he has now had in consecutive seasons. In the fourth round, the Texans had 2 picks, and they took cornerback Jalen Smith from USC, which I think is a reach, and they take running back Joquavius Marks, also from USC, which I think is a reach as well. I had both of these as like late day 3 picks, not early day 3 picks, so I think they reached a little bit, but they get some depth. I think getting a running back behind Mixon, not a bad decision, and another cornerback, you never have too many of those. In the sixth, they had 2 picks. They take safety Jalen Reed from Penn State, and then they take quarterback Graham Mertz from Florida. I think Graham Mertz is a developmental project. Jalen Reed has a chance to outperform his draft position here, but probably starts as just a third safety. And then to finish off their class, they had two seventh round picks. They took Keontae Hamilton, D tackle from Rutgers, who was just a run stopping machine. And then at 255, they take tight end Luke Leachy from Iowa, who at the very least has a projectable frame, but wasn't really able to put it together at Iowa, which is surprising because Iowa has produced a lot of good tight ends in the last few years. Continuing on now with the AFC North, we'll start with the Cleveland Browns. Now, their big move was trading out of the number 2 pick, which was great for them. They were able to collect a bunch of extra picks. I don't believe that they fully wanted to take Hunter at 2. So, they trade out. They end up taking Mason Graham at number 5, who will be a great addition to their defensive line. They've needed that kind of dominant interior presence for a while now. So he'll be a good fit for them. With their pick in the second round, they take linebacker Carson Schwezinger from UCLA. I like the pick. I do think it's a little bit of a reach, but they decided they needed an off-ball linebacker, and they got one of the best ones in this class behind Campbell. And then with their second first-round pick, they took running back Quinshon Judkins from Ohio State. I like this pick. I think that he'll be sort of like a Nick Chubb for them. I don't know if he'll put up that kind of production, but at the very least, he'll be the bruising back that they like out there in Stefanski's offense. In the third round, they had 2 picks. The first pick, they took tight end Harold Fannin Jr. from Bowling Green. I'm not as big on Fannin Jr. as other people are, and I don't love this pick for the Browns because they still have Njoku. But if they want to run more 2 tight end sets, which probably fits their offensive scheme better, then having Fannin is not a negative. It could be a positive. So I can see the thinking there. And then at the end of the third round, they do take a quarterback. They take quarterback Dylan Gabriel from Oregon. I don't like this pick. I think besides, I'll get to Shedeur Sanders in a second, but with this pick, I think they should have gone elsewhere just in general. They obviously identified that they like Gabriel, but I think he's a reach here. So I don't like it, especially when Will Howard goes off in the 6th round. I feel like he would have been a better developmental project than Gabriel. Howard has prototypical size. He won at Ohio State, which is always fun to keep guys in state, but they go with Gabriel instead. And then in the 4th round, they take running back Dylan Simpson from Tennessee. Kind of a redundant pick. Should help to spell Judkins a little bit, but again, there's a redundancy here. They could have taken Simpson in the 4th and not taken Judkins in the 2nd, or they could have not taken Simpson in the 4th and taken Judkins in the 2nd. It seems meaningless, but they didn't really have a running back on roster because I don't think they want to run Ford out there again. So they draft 2 guys in a good running back class. Not the worst decision they could have made. Now, that could possibly be them trading up in the 5th round to take Shedeur Sanders. Now, I've already talked extensively on this at the beginning of this episode, but I will just say I think this was an ownership pick. I don't hate the fit. I think that Sanders could start for them games this year, but after taking Gabriel, signing Flacco, trading for Pickett, there's a lot of mouths to feed out there in Cleveland at quarterback. I think the likely scenario is Gabriel, Sanders, and Pickett are on the roster. Flacco is traded or just cut, and is in camp as a veteran presence for these younger quarterbacks. And then Watson's on the injured list for most of the season, not all of the season. But also, I could see it being in the realm of possibility that like Gabriel or Sanders is traded. I don't really think Pickett could get traded. It's possible if Gabriel or Sanders seizes the starting role that Pickett could get moved instead. But I'm like, They already know what Pickett's value is, and it's maybe a seventh. So if that's the direction they end up going, because Pickett doesn't win the job or doesn't look good in camp, then that's the direction they'll go. But I would expect both rookie quarterbacks to be on roster, and then Pickett and Flacco, whoever's left, to be the starter, at least initially. But overall, I think they did a really good job trading back, getting an extra first, an extra second, and then taking Mason Graham, who I assume they preferred the whole time, this whole time. And then I think Schlesinger a little bit of a reach. They took two running backs, which I don't love. They took a luxury pick with a tight end. They took two quarterbacks. So I just don't think they did a good job filling their holes, despite the fact that they did start off well. But if Sanders or Gabriel hits at quarterback, I don't think any of that's going to matter. And they will count this class as a win, as they should. But moving on now to the Cincinnati Bengals. I like what they did at the top of their draft. But I think they could have gone elsewhere at 16. Shamar Stewart is an athletic freak, but the production doesn't come close to matching his athleticism. And the like projection of what his body could be. There's also the fact that he showed up to the combine having lost like 20 pounds compared to his college listed weight. So so it's just an interesting pick. I think they could have gone elsewhere with this pick, but they get a guy that hopefully they can develop better than they did Miles Murphy, who they took in the first round a few years ago. And in the second round, they get a good off-ball linebacker in Demetrius Knight Jr. out of South Carolina. I like Knight better than Schlesinger from UCLA, who the Browns took. So I think the Bengals got good value here at 49. At 81 in the third round, they take guard Dylan Fairchild out of Georgia. I expect him to come in and be a above average starter at one of the guard positions immediately. So I think this is a good get for the Bengals and an even better get for Joe Burrow. In the fourth round, they take linebacker Barrett Carter from Clemson. Again, another team taking a redundancy pick. So I guess it's a throwing darts at a board and hoping one hits type of draft for a lot of people. In the fifth round, with 153, they take tackle Jalen Rivers from Miami. Like I've been saying for other guys around this draft slot, at the offensive line, it's depth. He's a swing tackle. He might play some guard possibly, but don't expect big things out of him this year. And then in the sixth round, they get running back Taj Brooks from Texas Tech. I like this pick. He has the chance to be a very serviceable backup behind Chase Brown for a Bengals team that could use a little depth at running back. But overall, I think Knight and Fairchild really helped to carry this class. I don't love the Carter pick. I don't love the Stewart pick. But at the very least, Stewart has the potential to outperform his his draft position. So, we'll see what happens there. But now moving on to the Pittsburgh Steelers. At 21, they took defensive tackle Derek Harmon out of Oregon, which makes a lot of sense for them as he is compared favorably to Cam Hayward. So, he'll probably play next to Hayward and then eventually supplant him when Hayward retires. So I like the pick there. I also like the player. In the third round, they took who I expected them to take, which was Caleb Johnson, running back from Iowa. I think it's a good fit for them, and he'll be a good complement to Jaylen Warren in the Steelers' backfield this season. In the fourth round, they got, I think, one of the steals of the draft when they took Jack Sawyer, edge rusher from Ohio State. I had him as a second round grade, and I really liked some fits that I saw for him at the end of the second round. He falls all the way to the middle end of the fourth round, and he gets picked up by a Steelers team here that doesn't really need him, but I'm sure the board spoke to them, and that was just a value pick that they could not turn down, and I don't blame them. In the fifth round, they take at 164 Yaya Black, defensive tackle from Iowa. They get some more size in the interior of their defense, which they needed because they weren't as stout against the run as they would like. In the sixth round, at pick 185, they take quarterback Will Howard I like this pick, but I question the Steelers' ability to develop quarterbacks, so I don't know. I like that he fell to them and they didn't need to take him with like a fifth or a fourth, but I don't trust them to develop him properly. So we'll see what happens, but I think it's a long shot that he's able to be a starter for them. In the seventh, they had two picks. They took linebacker Carson Bruner from Washington and cornerback Deontay Kent from Central Michigan. Just two shot in the darks that hopefully can pay off for them. And the last team in this division is the Baltimore Ravens. The first round pick, they take safety Malachi Starks from Georgia, number 27. He is a player that got hurt by prospect fatigue and a down year last year. He was potentially a top 10 pick coming into this season. He had a down year comparative to the previous season, and he ends up falling to the Ravens here. And all I can say is that they got their perfect complement to Kyle Hamilton at safety at the back end of that defense. So good for them, and look out if you're throwing the ball against the Ravens. In the second round, they stopped the slide of edge rusher Mike Green by taking him at pick 59. I touched on this earlier, but he fell because of domestic violence issues, not any imminent ones, but just the fact that he's been accused twice. Nothing he's ever been convicted, but he's been accused of it twice, once in high school, once in college. He also shows a lot of really good pass rushing chops, so we'll see what he's able to do. I do think that he might have capped his potential in college, so I don't think there's much room to grow. But as a rotational pass rushing edge rusher, I think they got really good value at pick 59. In the third, they take a developmental tackle in Emory Jones Jr. from LSU. He's very raw, but they don't need him to start immediately. At least they shouldn't, barring injury. But Ronnie Stanley has injury issues, so we'll see what happens. But ideally, he's able to sit behind Stanley for the 2 to 3 years and then eventually supplant him once he is better developed. In the fourth, they take linebacker Teddy Buchanan from California. I think it's a little bit of a reach. I didn't have him this high, but they need someone next to Smith in the middle of their defense. And in the fifth round, they take offensive tackle Carson Vincent from Alabama A&M, 141, another developmental prospect for them. In the sixth, they had, 5 picks. So they took a lot of guys. They took cornerback Bilal Cohn from Western Michigan, kicker Tyler Loop from Arizona, wide receiver LeJohntay Webster from Colorado, defensive tackle Ines Peebles from Virginia Tech, and cornerback Robert Longerbeam from Rutgers. I'll start with the corners. Longerbeam is a slot corner out of Rutgers. He shows really good toughness, playing like zone man in the slot, as well as playing against the run. And Bilal Cohn is the outside corner. They're both shot in the darks. Taking a kicker here basically probably spells the end of Justin Tucker in Baltimore, at least. With him having accusations similar to Deshaun Watson, I would be surprised if he even plays in the league again with his age and ineffectiveness last season. So the Ravens have a new kicker. And with our track record with kickers, I would expect Loop to be pretty good, despite the I can't remember, the other guy went. I don't remember where he went. I think he was out of Florida, but he did have some better numbers in college than Loop did. But you trust the Ravens here. LeJohntay Webster is a good shot in the dark for them out of Colorado, and then Peebles could be a good first and second down run stopping defensive tackle for them. And then with their last pick in the 7th round, they go with guard Garrett Dellinger from LSU. I do like this pick. I don't think he should have fallen this far. So they scoop him up and save him from the UDFA pool, essentially. Moving on to the AFC East in our last division to touch upon. We'll start off with the New England Patriots, as with the 4th pick, they take offensive tackle Will Campbell, who I think can stick at tackle for them. So it's nice that they were able to get some protection for Drake May to help him develop and stay healthy. In the second round, they take running back Trevion Henderson from Ohio State, who will be a great complement as like the speed back to Ramondre Stevenson's power back. In the third round, they have 2 picks. They take wide receiver Kyle Wilson out of Washington State. I think it's a little bit of a reach, but that's kind of what the Patriots do. They take the guy that they prefer, not the guy that should go. So not surprising. And then they take center Jared Wilson from Georgia at pick 95. He should be a plug and play player, which they need with David Andrews having retired. So good on them being able to get a very athletic center to be able to fill that spot as well on their offensive line. In the fourth round, they had 2 picks. They took safety Craig Woodson from California, who I'm indifferent about, and then they also took at pick 137 defensive tackle Joshua Farmer from Florida State, who I think they got really good value with, as he was potentially a day 2 prospect falling to them at the end of the fourth round. But moving on to the fifth round, they take edge rusher Braden Swinson from LSU at pick 146. This is even a little, I was not as high on him as other people were. I saw some people having him as like a top 60, top 70 prospect. I had him probably around the 80s to 90s ending up. So I think they got really good value here at pick 146. And then speaking of kickers, we have it was a Miami kicker, not the Florida kicker, Andres Borregales, round 6, pick 182 here for the Patriots. He did have the better numbers to loop, so good on them being able to get a good kicker, hopefully, that can be their Goskowski and Vinatieri, just like the last guys that they had were. And then in the seventh round, they had 3 picks. They took offensive tackle Marcus Bryant from Mizzou, long snapper Julian Ashby from Vanderbilt, and cornerback Kobe Minor from Memphis. The tackle and the corner are just developmental prospects, and I so appreciate the long snapper love. It is a forgotten position, but it is a position that all NFL teams have and need, and Ashby getting drafted at the end of the 7th, I think, was a beautiful thing for the sport and for long snappers in general. So good on the Patriots. And overall, I think they picked up 2 starters on their offensive line, a potential interior defensive lineman starter, developmental edge rusher, a kicker. So I really like their class. I think that they did a lot. And if Kyle Wilson or Trevion Henderson can completely, blow the doors off, then they'll have, I think, a home run of a draft class. But moving on to the Jets, at number 7, they went with the right tackle, who I kind of late in the process attached them to, which was offensive tackle Armand Membu from Mizzou. Very athletic. He will plug and play at right tackle for them, which will be good for Justin Fields. And then in the second round, they take tight end Mason Taylor from LSU, son of former Dolphins great Jason Taylor. I like the pick here. I probably would have gone Arroyo instead of Taylor, but Taylor is a more complete and developed player at this point, so he should be able to plug into the Jets offense and help them if they do want to run 2 tight end sets with Conklin, help them out there. But I also think that he should be the starter over Conklin. In the third round, at pick 73, they get Azare, I believe, Thomas, cornerback from Florida State. I was a fan of his coming out. I probably had him going about in this range, so I think that they get a good cornerback at the spot where he probably should have gone. In the fourth, they had 2 picks. I like one, I don't like the other. I like the pick at 130. They took safety Malachi Moore from Alabama. I think he got undervalued a little bit, and there's potential that he's able to make some plays this season, let alone develop into a starting caliber player in the coming seasons. But at pick 110, they take wide receiver Arian Smith from Georgia, pure projection type pick. So I don't love it when they could use a receiver next to Garrett Wilson. In the 5th round, they have their last 2 picks. They took linebacker Francisco Moguo from Miami, and then edge rusher Tyler Baron from Miami as well. Both these guys are okay prospects, probably a little overdrafted in my opinion, but developmental pieces that the Jets at the end of the fifth round decided to roll the dice on. So we'll see what Aaron Glenn is able to do with them on defense out there in New York. But moving on to the Miami Dolphins, they do what a lot of people weren't expecting them to do, and they take the unsexy picks with their top three picks here. In the first round, they take Kenneth Grant, the gigantic nose tackle from Michigan. Very athletic for a guy at his size, so he should be able to play well immediately and make a difference on the defensive interior for the Dolphins that has been very weak in the last few years. And then at pick 37, they take Jonah Savanea, offensive tackle from Arizona. Dolphins needed a tackle. I think that this is a product of the run on tackles that has happened leading up to this pick. 'Cause I think he was a little overvalued here, but they also don't have another pick until the fifth round. So I get it. They addressed a need, which you can appreciate. And in the fifth round, they had three picks. At 143, they took defensive tackle Jordan Phillips from Maryland. At 150, they take cornerback Jason Marshall Jr. from Florida. And at 155, they take safety Dante Trader Jr. from Maryland. I think Phillips is a steal at 143, so good for them getting another interior presence. I think Phillips and Grant could both start for them going into week one of the season. So great get there. Marshall and Trader, I think, a little bit less on. I don't necessarily love the value, but they did need help on the defensive secondary. So without a third or a fourth round pick, they take guys that I assume they think fit their system well. So, I can't fault them there. In the sixth, they take running back Ollie Jordan II from Oklahoma State at pick 179. I think this is a really good pick for them. Ollie Gordon lost a lot of his prospect shine after a down season at Oklahoma State this past year, but he is a bruising back, and he should be a good complement to Devon Achane in the Dolphins' backfield. In the seventh round, they had two picks. They took QB Quinn Ewers from Texas at 231, and at 253, they took defensive tackle Zeke Biggers from Georgia Tech, both developmental prospects. I love the pick of Ewers as he was potentially going to be like a day two quarterback at one point. Had some injuries and some ineffectiveness issues at Texas in his last season. Probably should have came out last year, but that's neither here nor there. We'll see what McDaniels can do with him. And then Biggers, just another body for them on the defensive interior, which, again, they had a lot of issues with. So getting that depth will be nice. Overall, I think they took advantage of filling some gaps with the picks they did have. And I think they had a good draft. We'll see what Jonah Savanea is able to do, but Grant and Phillips were good picks. I think Gordon can do some stuff for them, and Ewers, who knows? But our last team to go through and the last team of the AFC East here is the Buffalo Bills. They picked at 30. They took cornerback Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky. Once that pick was announced, I found it very funny. I think that it is almost like an exact response to the Chiefs having Worthy. But, who knows if that's actually true. I will say that Hairston doesn't play with sub 4.3 speed. So hopefully the Bills are able to develop him a little bit, keep him healthy, and utilize him to the best of their abilities. Their next pick at pick 41, they trade up to take defensive tackle TJ Sanders from South Carolina. I think this is just a situation where they identified that they had a guy that they liked on their board and they traded up to get him. So good on them. I do like Sanders, even though I don't. I think he might have slid to them. He might not have. So they trade up and guarantee that they get him. At pick 72, they take edge rusher Landon Jackson from Arkansas. I really like this pick. I like his ability. He's a prototypical edge rusher. He's got great size, great instincts, and hopefully they're able to develop him similar to how they did Greg Rousseau that they took a few years ago. Another guy that they will look to take advantage of a prototypical form is at 109 in round 4, they take Dion Walker from Kentucky. The story for Walker is that he is oozing talent, but the production doesn't match it. He's a very large man. So we'll see if the Bills are able to extract that talent out of him. In the 5th, they had 2 picks. They take safety Jordan Hancock from Ohio State and tight end Jackson Hawes from Georgia Tech. I like Hawes. I think it's good value for them, despite the fact that they already have 2 good tight ends in Knox and in Dalton Kincaid. The safety, I think they took him about where Hancock should have gone, so I can't fault them there. And they probably could use a little bit of safety help. In the 6th round, they had 2 picks. They took cornerback Dorian Strong at 177 from Virginia Tech, and at 206 they took Chase Lunt, the offensive tackle from Connecticut. Excuse me. I love the pick of Strong here. I had him as a round 3-4 player. Getting him in the 6th is absolutely great value at a position of need as well. So good on the Bills for that. And the tackle Lunt from Connecticut, just developmental tackle, swing tackle potentially, and some depth, which, at offensive line, you can never have too much of. And then with their last pick in the 7th round, they take at 240 wide receiver Caden Prather from Maryland, just a developmental guy. Like I've been saying, getting a jump on the UDFA pool, essentially. But that has been my thoughts on every teams, all 32 of them, draft class. If you guys made it this far, thank you, thank you, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I put a lot of effort and a lot of thought into getting through all these classes and knowing enough about the players for you guys. So thank you so much. If you got this far, if you'd like more sports content, specifically NFL and MLB, please subscribe to Ballhawk Sports Media, and I will see you next week.